Hello everyone, and I'm back from my college schedule. This time, I've decided to talk about something that is complex and seemingly unrelated to the general topic of fiction, but trust me, it is. And that's the complex topic of postmodernism. You might remember the topic of postmodernism coming up in my video, What's Postmodern Fiction? There, I first explained where postmodernism came from, spanning a 200 period between 1789 and 1989, and being marked by a leap in progress, verifiable truth, historical narratives, and meaning derived from the aforementioned. Whereas postmodernism started in 1989 during the symbolic destruction of Marxist communism in both the Tiananmen Square protests and the destruction of the Berlin Wall. Postmodernism is characterized by a belief that meaning doesn't exist or is unknowable, relative perspectives, clashes of power and hierarchies, smaller non-historical narratives, hyper-individualism, and occasionally tribalism. But why has postmodernism stuck around for so long and taken the form that it has, and why did it occur when it did? Well, it's not accidental and has to do with the way that technology currently is and how we choose to interact with it. Here, I plan to explain why the era known as postmodernism has fallen yet. You see, another big thing happened in 1989 besides Tiananmen and the Berlin Wall, and that was the invention of the World Wide Web in March 1989. Although he didn't start working on a physical internet until late 1990, a British computer scientist known as Tim Berners-Lee proposed something called the World Wide Web that would feature connected computers sharing pages full of text and links not unlike the preceding bulletin board system. Although his proposal wasn't met with much fanfare, eventually the web caught on and became the modern-day internet as we know today. Now, it's very apparent to me that the internet has shaped postmodernism because it's of enormous impact. But how can I convince you of such a pretentious claim? Well, statistically speaking, by 2015, there were about 3.5 billion internet users in this world, about half of current living humanity. And the figure gets higher every year globally, not just because of more people being born every year, but because of globalism and wealth creation. As for our daily lives, it was reported by Nielsen, the company that deals with television viewership, also linked in the description, that the average adult American devotes more than 10 hours to screen time daily. This is also increasing worldwide as the world continues to develop due to global trade, increasing relaxation on totalitarianism, and the world wanting to be like America in almost every conceivable way because of the aforementioned globalism. We just get to do it more because we're richer, we have more free time, and more political freedom to do so, as well as social freedom that tolerates such internet use. But how does this relate back to the nature of postmodernism? Well, think about the nature of the internet and what being alone like that does to you and how you use it. Think about all the media we consume. Think of the recent concept of binge watching, for example, just to name one example of modern internet use, because let's face it, Netflix is the internet too. I would argue that without so much screen time and general immersion with media, we could never have had something like the postmodern idea of pastiche, just to name one example. For those who don't know, a pastiche is the intentional referencing of other text within another text or in another work. There's a work that imitates the style or character of the work, one or more artists. Specific examples would be like the main reference found within The Simpsons, or perhaps the nature of contemporary meme culture itself. However, I think the internet has only helped the epoch of postmodernism, going back to the idea that postmodernism could have only happened at a specific time, and if the reality is more messy than that. I would argue that even without the internet or our convenient ways of accessing it, postmodernism would still be upon us. Because modernism focused on the individual and the wealth building, we now have our own rooms, a wealth of general privacy, and cars afford us both freedom and autonomy that all add to another facet of postmodernism, hyper-individualism. Think how much privacy we have now as well as physical space just for ourselves, whereas in the pre-modern world and most of world history, families had to all share a single room together as farmers. But now, with the internet, we get to fulfill so many other aspects of postmodernism than just hyper-individualism, the personal narrative, and the pastiche. On the internet, one need only experience what one wants to and talk to who one wants to in a controlled environment, essentially like a college safe space. It can be somewhere someone can form, to use a proper expression, their truth, by being immersed in a reality they can make and control with the right tools. And it can be someone who can find their own tribe if they know where to look and find acceptance anywhere. But most of all, they contribute to the postmodern idea of hyperreality, the idea of being unable to distinguish reality from a simulation reality because of exposure to, wait for it, media, or in other words, fiction. Yes, this all leads me to how this all has affected our fiction media in the last 30 years since postmodernism came upon us. Here we need to look at postmodernism as an epoch and what the current trends are within its era so far. Superhero films, biopics, shock comedy, and the woke social thriller. Okay, so let's start with superhero films. They're basically like what westerns were for the 20th century. They also are a perfect example of how pastiche works and how it ultimately rules our area. Why were the Marvel movies so successful to begin with? Well, people of previous generations knew what things like Iron Man and Spider-Man were from comics and cartoons, making such characters and stories what postmodern theorists would call cultural texts. Look at Avengers Endgame. It's the highest grossing film of all time, one of the most expensive films of all time. But why? Well, because of the last 12 years, or 11 years, depends on how you count, Marvel and other companies have been assaulting the market with superheroes, making the Marvel universe as accessible as well as possible. Many complained that Endgame was just one reference after another, and if it was all one big pastiche, but everyone got it because of the previous shared cultural text known as the Marvel Cinematic Universe in one form or another, even if you knew a handful of movies. And now it's the biggest movie ever. Next, biopics, or biopics, because it's biographical picture, whatever. You've probably guessed by now that this is where I talk about hyper-individualism, and you're right. But I think the bigger point here is that not only is it a bit selfish, but it also gives us perhaps the biggest incentive for postmodern hyper-individualism, the media's celebrity. Obviously, hundreds of years ago, the concept of celebrity was virtually restricted to the nobility and to the few that were famous because they became rich. However, fast forward to today, and the technology and wealth to become a celebrity is virtually everywhere and expanding everywhere due to globalism. Heck, look at places like Graceland and Dollywood, two entire places dedicated to life of just one person. And in the state, Tennessee, they used to be dirt poor just a century ago. Mind-blowing. But why do I focus on the biopic? Or biopic? Well, the whole point of the biopic is to start the cycle all over again, for you to emphasize with the main character on your path to stardom. And again, with globalism, ship that idea across the world. Biopics are the main commodity of celebrity, many times becoming bigger than the person they promote, especially if that person is already dead. But wait, shock comedy, what's that doing on this list? Well, I think shock comedy is namely postmodernity's deconstruction in action, obviously aimed at social norms and taboos, and couldn't have been a thing as of yet for obvious reasons. You probably know that there was a time when we were limited to less formats for fiction in the past, and those formats had strict censorship attached to them, especially TV. But it should be pointed out that a lack of censorship isn't shock, and shock isn't necessarily comedy. During the early 1970s, when films such as A Clockwork Orange and Pink Flamingos came out, they were shock, but they weren't comedic. You can also argue that in their shock, they were more nihilistic and then deconstructed due to various things going on in America, such as the Vietnam War and general counterculture. This era definitely paved the way for other aspects of postmodernism, such as irony and a rejection of the notion of progress or universal decency. It's also notable that the adult cartoon, a genre known for the use of shock comedy, was birthed in this era, with the anime films of Ralph Bakshi, the underground comics of artists like Robert Crumb, and the Japanese adults-only animated pink films that were precursors to the contemporary eroge anime. And now look at the postmodern era. 1989 was the year many agree that postmodern started, and yet again we see a huge postmodern epoch with the release of The Simpsons, a show that is still ongoing that at the time of its release was seen as very subversive because it deconstructed the middle American concepts of the nuclear family that might have been seen in earlier works such as Leave It to Beaver, I Love Lucy, Andy Griffin Show, etc. Deconstructed especially also the small town, which from the annoying neighbor to the town drunk. But it wasn't enough. There was still more to be deconstructed. The ante needed to be upped. So we got edgier shows like Family Guy and South Park. And fast forward today, one must really try hard to be edgy in order to deconstruct further. I mean, look at characters like Family Guy's Quagmire. He definitely went from a general pervert to literally being a pedophile as the show progressed, and just for yucks, disturbingly. Essentially, for lack of a better word, flanderizing the character. And now because of this, comedy has been dominated by shock in order to fulfill the postmodern call to deconstruct. The last subject on our list is the woke social thriller. Okay, to prevent this from getting too partisan and too quote-unquote political, I'll simply talk about the intentions of such fiction and how postmodernism figures into it. Well, one of the big tenets of postmodernism is institutional critique, and on the farther left of the idea is social critical theory. Basically, the core idea of critical theory is that societal systems, such as courts, the law, general society, all combine to oppress a group, usually a minority. Some postmodernists would go as far as saying this proves that human nature doesn't exist, especially postmodern leftists, because evil to them doesn't reside in human hearts, but rather evils such as racism or something engraved into our society, in systems, not necessarily people who make up systems. And when you know it, there's more than one version of critical theory too. There's critical race theory, which features non-whites in a white majority nation being oppressed through invisible institutional racism and oppressive cultural artifacts such as Eurocentric educational system, white Southern Christianity, Mayo, or even the Betsy Ross flag on shoes, that basically prevent a revolution to overthrow such systems, interestingly enough. Also, critical queer theory, which sees the LGBTQ+ community and those who are into fetishes as being oppressed by heterosexuals. And critical gender theory, which feature women and genderqueer people as oppressed, of course. We see these postmodern ideas found in works like the Wachowskis' Cloud Atlas, for instance, which gives us a taste of all these critical theories and the various timelines of the film features. For instance, during the 1849 timeline gives us critical race theory, with the featuring of slavery, and the 1930s timeline, which features critical queer theory with the characters Robert Frobisher and his boyfriend Rufus Six Smith oppressed in a homophobic 1930s England, where a major point of contention comes from his threatening to reveal his boss's bisexuality that he works under. Now, other than Wachowskis, another famous filmmaker who has used critical theory is Jordan Peele, whose use of critical race theory is seen throughout his work, and the postmodern idea of conflicting narratives and social power, such as in Weird City, a series he co-created about a futuristic city divided into bourgeoisie and proletariat-esque have and have-nots. Lastly, to answer the question of the entire video, why hasn't postmodernism fallen yet? Well, I think you might know by now. The reason why postmodernism hasn't fallen yet because just like the machines in the Matrix use the energy of humans to power the delusion they put those same humans in, our use of technology keeps the postmodern hyper-reality alive. And while discussing how postmodernism might fall, we will have to be another video, unfortunately. And I predict with the rise of VR and the ability to plug our minds into a virtual world, will keep postmodernism alive for quite a while. If you think things like porn addiction is bad now, especially its use on the internet, imagine what it will be like once we can jack into a virtual world with it without any social or physical rules and be able to slow down our perception of time within it so we can experience for hundreds of years. I think the phrase, it needs to get a whole lot worse to get a whole lot better, is true in this situation. Truly, this is the huge reason why I think postmodernism has to be replaced, but again, I think that's a topic for another video. Okay, I hope you all enjoyed this very long video for myself. I hope it didn't depress you too much, and I hope it helped you to see how our fiction is deeply influenced by postmodernism and where postmodernism might be headed. Hopefully I'll do more of some short film videos in the nearish future, like my Trivia Tuesdays video. But in the meantime, expect more content from my podcast as my college semester turns out to be a third done. This is Mr. Fiction 1, hoping you'll subscribe to hopefully less complex content such as this.